All right, welcome everybody to the Playing Games Podcast, episode 26. And today I'm joined by a very special guest and researcher, Dr. Eduardo De Souza. Dr. De Souza, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you again for your time. I'm sure you're probably very busy, so it's very meaningful that you decided to take some time and join the podcast today. So, before we get started, I'm probably sure most of our viewers have heard of who you are, but maybe you'd like to give a little more background on your history in the field and where you are now and what you've been looking at recently in the research.
Yeah, sure. I'm born and raised in São Paulo, Brazil. Uh, so I did my undergrad in physical education. In Brazil, exercise science is under the umbrella of physical education. So, but kind of my bachelor's degree is equivalent to exercise science degree. So then I did a professional master's without a thesis, was working with resistance training towards older population. And when I met Professor Dr. Valmor Tricoli, that time he just went back Brazil. He finished his PhD here in US. Then his lecture was about muscle fiber chains, the muscle fiber, the proportions of fast twitch fibers, slow twitch, how the fibers responded to training regimens. And I'm like, man, I want to study this. And I went to talk to him at the end of the lecture. Professor Valmor is a friend now. He's been a friend for decades at this point. And he's really funny guy. He's like, yeah, sure, you can go to my lab. If you survive, you can stay. And then I survived. So then I met my mentor and friend, Dr. Carlos Ugrinovich, and we started to discuss my master's thesis. And that was a while ago. The goal was to try to understand that interference effect. At that time, I was doing a lot of fiber cross-sectional area analysis, histochemical analysis, and also MRI, and also combining with a gene expression and Western blotting. So all those genes and proteins that control oxidative adaptations like a mitochondrial biogenesis and muscle growth. I was mapping and trying to figure out if that interference that back then we thought the interference was something triggered at molecular level. So that was my master's. I just wrote a paper, it was a review paper with a bunch of other researchers about the bodybuilding, the myths. And the myth I was writing about was that cardio kills your gains for hypertrophy. At this point, we assume that interference is more as an artifact of a measurement that takes place sometimes in type 1 fibers rather than the whole muscle size. So I measure muscle size from fiber perspective, so the micro perspective to the macro with an MRI. And I don't recall, I was not the first, but my data kind of aligned with, I don't remember, was Professor McCarthy or Bell. They showed the same findings that interference between cardio and strength took place at fiber level, not at macroscopical MRI level. So in the middle of my master's, I was invited to skip straight to the PhD. I'm kind of stubborn, and I was like, no, I want to finish this one and do a new project. Although if I started a little late my grad studies, I finished my PhD. I was 37 years old, and I have my son already, so I have a son and daughter. And during the PhD, the idea was pretty cool, actually. Something happened, but we were about to study resensitization. Like we know that when we start training, we all know that the adaptations, they follow like a logarithmic pattern. We have these cheaper gains in the first 3 months, 6 months, first year of training, and kind of those gains start to kind of stall and get smaller and smaller. And the idea was whether or not different load schemes would make the muscle more sensitive from a signaling, anabolic signaling standpoint. So we had the control group, we have a non-periodized one, and then you have a undulating periodization, and you have a traditional. And the idea was to do, we did 4 muscle biopsies, like a right after the first training session, right, not right after, sorry, it was 24 hours post last training session, 24 hours post last training session, and 96 hours post last training session. So it turned out we have a power outrage at University of São Paulo. We lost all the samples, and it took me 2 years and a half to collect the data. I remember the day I stepped in my Dr. Zogrinovic office, and like, man, I'm done. I'm not gonna do this anymore. I can't collect data, because it was training people on the weekdays and biopsies and MRIs on the weekends for 2 years and a half. And then I lost the samples. It turned out the data for MRI and the strength data, they were good. So then I published, I defended, I did analysis for Western blotting, gene expression. The data was all over the place because the what happened to the samples. And meanwhile, I defended my PhD in 2014. So in 2013, I came to Tampa, where I'm at right now, to help the guys with ultrasound measurement and standardization for fascicle length, pinatial angle, muscle thickness, cross-sectional area. So then I came here to stay like a few months, helped them, went back to Brazil, defended. They invited me to come back. So I came back US 2014 to stay 1 year. So it's been 11 years now. I started at UT as an adjunct. They liked of my service. They invited me to apply for a tenure track. So I moved from adjunct to assistant professor, and then I got tenured as associate professor. So yeah, it's been a quite interesting journey. So yeah, 11 years live the dream in America.
Yeah, it sounds like you've done a lot throughout that time. And I think with I wanted to ask, with hypertrophy research, is it difficult to get funding? Because I've noticed a lot of people who are in hypertrophy end up moving toward like cardiac and other sort of hypertrophy, because that's where like the money is, or more clinicians are interested in funding rather than just wanting to build muscle. So I feel like finding a lab that actually has a good funding is kind of difficult to do.
You are absolutely correct. I'm fortunate, man. The place I work, I got funding through my university, my department. I think my lab has been quite active when it comes to studying trained populations. We have done a lot for the last decade, pretty much. But I remember, I think I was at NSCA National, and Mike Orsby from Florida State, he was presenting, and one guy kind of like raised a hand, like have a question. Why don't you have those type of studies in trained individuals? And Dr. Orsby, like, straightforward, there is no money there. And that's reality. And people don't realize how much work goes into training studies. And it's not just logistic standpoint, but also financially. It's you can't apply for a competitive grant with a study about training individuals who want to be jacked, grow muscle as much as they can. It's quite hard. Like, there is no, again, money is not there for this type of research. So people should be more thankful for those, not just me, but have so many great doctors and colleagues I know doing resistance training studies in health and train individuals, because it usually is like they allocate part of a major funding to a training study sometimes. Again, I have a system in place that allows me to do research for trained people. I think I just finished one now with untrained. It was about the effect of sleeping on muscular adaptations. We had a training volume as a secondary question. I can explain a little bit about that. The results surprised me again, but that was with untrained people. But I think, man, that might be like with a train intervention. I think that was the first one I did with untrained people. All the other studies I have been doing here with trained individuals. But again, I got lucky to work in the place that always there are downsides. So I don't have grad students to help me. I don't have I do have the students in the professional master's program, the exercise and nutrition science program we have here, but it's not a thesis oriented program. They don't need to do research. So I got to convince people that research is cool. It got to be a nice trade-off. The students see some benefit from getting involved. But like I said, maybe the downside is I don't have a lot. I do the heavy lifting here. I do my peer reviewing. I'm very often in the lab helping students with the data collection. But on the bright side, the university allows me to do the type of research I want. So that's a cool thing. Yeah, no money there for this type of research.
Yeah, unfortunately, but I mean, we are seeing. I think we are.
Open, though, if there is someone listening wants to fund me, I'm open to receive funding to do more studies in trained people.
I think we are seeing, or we are living in an era where I think the hypertrophy research is kind of expanding, and seeing like popular fitness YouTubers, people who are making money from this, are beginning to fund studies. And I think it's really cool that they're doing that. And I think that's very helpful too, because it allows us to progress with this. So it's nice to see that. With that said, I think one of the papers, what the reason why I wanted to invite you on today was to talk about this paper that's been causing a lot of controversy for some reason. Well, actually, not for some reason, but it was your swelling paper. So before kind of getting into the issues that people may have with it, or the questions that people want to follow along with, maybe if you can kind of explain what you guys did, what happened, what you found, and if it surprised you.
Yeah, sure. We need to go back a little bit and provide the listeners with some context, right? And I love joining podcasts because we can discuss things we don't have a time, or we are constrained by the size of the paper, the number of pages, those kind of things. So we can share the behind the scenes about any paper, right? So I think the swelling / edema thing started with our infamous 52 weekly sets paper that most people did not read the paper, to be honest, because we were very clear that there were no statistical differences between we have a 4 weekly sets progression, 6 weekly sets progression versus 22 fixed weekly sets. So one group ended up with a 52 weekly sets only at the last 2, and the other one ended up with a 42. So we were very clear in the paper there were no statistical differences between, although the data suggested a small advantage. We also pointed out that uncertainty should be acknowledged, because when you did a post hoc between group comparisons, no statistical differences, and also the confidence intervals, they indicated high level of uncertainty as they crossed zero. So we could put a lot of stock and say that, oh, A is different from B and C, so on and so forth. But I think we had two camps at this point, right? It's we as a scientists, we are not attached to the data we publish. We try to expand based on the type of research we have been doing. But then we started to see that, oh, that's not actual muscle growth. That's all edema. That's all swelling. That's not. And again, the paper was clear. There was no statistical difference. But we had one group, right, one camp, so to speak, pushing for the high volume narrative that, hey, more is better. I think that statement is also problematic for several reasons. We can discuss that. I'm not in the camp of more is better, or the only thing you need is low volume. Again, I think there are contexts that we gotta approach and address them. And then I started to wondering, like, but what swelling people are talking about it, right? Like, you talk about swelling, edema, and I think we need to differentiate the things here. Swelling, and when I published a paper from our lab with Christopher Barakat, we are comparing was a cute paper and comparing 9 sets per session with shoulder joint and neutral position versus doing curl exercises with a neutral position, short bias exercise, and lengthening bias. We also call that swelling, like it was acute swelling. The way we differentiate that in the paper is that swelling is an acute phenomenon that involves perfusion and reperfusion. And also we have some osmotic change, because that change in metabolite concentration inside the muscle pulls water inside the muscle. Pretty much we talk about swelling as interchangeably with the pump, which we all love the pump, but you know that, right? I work out in the morning after drop off my kids. I have a shower, half of the pump is gone already. By evening, I can't flex to my wife anymore because the pump is gone pretty much. That goes away real quick. So the swelling is more a short-lived phenomenon that's related to that change in perfusion, reperfusion, and osmotic change induced by metabolite accumulation. Whereas when it comes to muscle, the edema, that would be more long-lived, so to speak, would be something that exercise-inducing muscle damage, increasing the fluid concentration inside the muscle. We know we have been discussing that, right? Damage is we still dealing with myofibular disruption, but it's mostly biochemical at this point when you look at the evidence. But that exercise inducing damage causing edema that would last to 48, 72, even 96 hours, inflating the measurements of hypertrophy. And also we have another thing going around that now the edema swelling is sarcoplasmic hypertrophy as well. So we made clear in the paper that when you have a training session and there is an increase in the pump, usually that lasts about 24 hours-ish. Some studies showing even shorter responses compared to 24 hours. Most of studies showing shorter responses. And then if damage is present, the muscle gets swollen for 2 days, 3 days post the workout. And always, based on what we know about repeated bout effect and measuring hypertrophy. So next year in 2027, I can say that for the last 20 or 2 decades, I have been publishing papers about this topic every year. I've been measuring muscle size, like I said, from a fiber standpoint, from a whole muscle standpoint for almost 2 decades. And that was never a concern among us scientists or researchers in our field that 48 hours post training is not enough to the acute swelling subside, and that's going to inflate the measurement. So that was my concern. Like, listen, we don't have a data supporting that in the chronic fashion, right? So then we made that distinction that swelling is that increase in fluid that lasts about 24 hours, and edema would be more related to the muscle damage per se. And then the muscle gets swollen about 48 hours, 72 hours. Trained individuals do experience muscle damage. However, the magnitude of muscle damage is way smaller compared to untrained. So that, and then I was like, okay, start wondering about this, and like, I do have a data that I collected in 2017. So the data was collected in 2017, and here's the why it took that long. And always, I do have most of the studies I have published, they are chronic, like a long term, like a training interventions. Long term, like overall the studies in our field, they're quite short, right? 8-12 weeks. I'm involved in pretty cool study now about training volume with 24 weeks of training, but overall the studies are short. And we collect the data 2017. We submitted the abstract to the national conference. And like I said, I do the heavy lifting here. So I ask the students, send me the data for the familiarization sessions, the test retest we did for the 10 rep max. And then you're going to present a measurement arrow, right? So when they send the data to me and I ran the statistical analysis and the measurement, the test retest arrow or variability was way higher than for 1 rep max. I remember the day I went to the lab, I was like, when you are learning by yourself, like being a researcher without your mentor to hold your hand. Although my mentor always let me to do my stuff, and afterwards we always discuss the pros and cons of my decisions. But I went to the lab like, guys, I'm sorry, I dropped the ball. We assume they were familiarized with the assessment, but we have a huge variability for test retest. Is in the paper. I don't remember exactly. I can pull up the paper. I'm not going to do that at this point. But I remember, for example, for maximal strength, all those studies have been doing, usually when the test retest people, the variation is less than 5% CV. So when they did that for the swelling paper, the variation was, I think the lowest one was 7 to 8%. And the extension exercise was quite high, like was 15% or more. Then I went down to the lab, guys, we're going to shut down the project because they were learning, right? They were learning how to do the test. Forget about it. Then I put the paper up to rest pretty much. And after the 52 weekly sets paper, Alisson, which in Brazil, Alisson is a male, right? So Alisson start talking to me and like, Edu, let's publish the data. And like, man, I don't know. Like at this point, like we collect the data a while ago, and he's like, no, let's write it. And then Alisson was in New York with Dr. Schoenfeld, and it was the holiday season. And like, a kid, you are alone this time over there. It's too cold. Come over Florida, spend the holidays with my family. So he came, we started to write the paper. And the idea was, okay, let's be as transparent as we can be and show that there was the test retest CV. For example, if you look all the acute studies we have about swelling, right? Like how back major muscle, how VL, rectus femoris, how they respond compared to baseline immediately post the workout, 24, 48, 72, and 96. Most of the studies, and that's a problem in our field, most of the studies did not report measurement error, did not report blinding for assessments. So again, because people like to do the selective criticism about what they're going to criticize, because those papers, most of those papers, because I'm putting something together, I made an Excel spreadsheet and putting out those, what was the sample size, how many sets per intervention, what was measured, and then you start to see yeah, that was different at 72, but when you look at the confidence interval, overlaps with 24 hours and baseline. So let's be transparent as we can be, and something we always strive to be as most transparent in any study we do. So let's present the measurement error for test retest for everything we have, and the standard error for the measurement, and people decide how to analyze the study. So it turned out and I put that in a limitation session, that the test retest variation for the 10 rep max assessment was quite high, but there is no data whatsoever reporting what is the actual test retest variation for a 10 rep max test. I'm very confident to say, I think we're the first to present that in the paper. And then I don't know if that is actual learning curve. The people is still learning how to do the test. They still not familiarized with the test, or if that is the actual variation of the test. So then, okay, let's write the paper. Then we wrote the paper, and the paper basically, the guys were pretty strong, for 10 rep max for squat. If convert to pounds, it was almost 3 plates for a parallel squat. So then we did the paper, we wrote the paper. Basically, the paper was comparing in a count and balance order 7, 14 versus 21 sets split across 3 exercises: squat, leg press, and knee extension. And to look at the effects of different volume assignments on perceptual assessments as a recovery scale and rating perceived exertion, the strength endurance performance via 10 rep max test, and muscle thickness and echo intensity. So that was the idea. So the study, and another thing that people don't understand when they're talking about science, I heard, oh, that's a joke. It's 13 people only in the study. Yes, 13 people in the within participant crossover design. So we have one study that I forgot, is the same group in Brazil. They did the same with a pack measure. I don't know if the pack measure the triceps or the lower body study, but pretty much they have a between group design, and they have 27 people in the study. 27 people in that type of the study has way less power than my study for 13 people. Why? Because in the within participant crossover design, I'm comparing Juan to Juan. In the between group, I'm comparing Eduardo with Juan and all the noise that comes with it. So again, that was a within participant study with a count and balance order for the sessions. That means you could perform first 7 sets, 14 and 20 week across 3 different weeks, or you could start with a 24, 14, depending on the randomization. So then what we found pretty much was that there were differences for perceptual assessments. Exertion was the highest for the 21 sets condition, higher than 14 and higher than I think we found difference between all the 3 conditions. However, the RPE for them started off with a 5, which is hard to very hard. So even 7 sets, training people felt hard to do 7 sets. We found also interesting findings when it comes to recovery. Over time, from perceptual recovery, they never felt recovered. So there was also like a recovery was worse. The perceived recovery was worse for the highest volume session compared to the lowest. But over time, they never felt recovered. Something we try to explain, like I think the design by doing the experimental session and knowing that after that they would have to perform 3 more reps to failure 10 RM max test after the experimental session, I think that played a role, kind of inducing some bias that participants felt no recovery because, oh man, here go again, right? I did 21 sets yesterday or 14 or 7. Now I go reps to failure with my 10 rep max load. Tomorrow I gotta do that again and tomorrow again. So I think that probably explained a little bit that. And the 10 RM max test. So what we did was for the test per se, we got their baseline, the 10 RM load. We set that load, and we had the people yelling at them to do as many reps they could with the 10 rep max load. We That was something that surprised us. Like I said, the 10 rep max load never dropped after the test. We can go back and spend on that because I have a data from my lab that people also dismiss when it's convenient that shows similar pattern as well. I like to say that there is an interesting phenomenon going on, especially on social media, that the more you train, the more fragile you get. You get super fatigable, you get super weak. The more you train, like you don't recover anymore. Everything's fatiguing. And I keep telling, like I've been studying those guys for a while. They keep surprising me about how much they can handle. And the thickness was the most important data, right? We deal with the thickness as the primary outcome. The thickness pretty much increased immediately post. And when it was 24 hours post the intervention, there were no differences compared to baseline. And we did not find any differences between conditions for the muscle thickness. So 21 sets did not increase more the thickness compared to 7 or 14. And all the conditions returned to the baseline numbers by 24 hours post the training intervention. I know we can expand and talk more and more about the findings, but just to have some context about why that the swelling edema is little misleading from terminology standpoint, and why we did the study, and why I waited for pretty much we talk about 8 years at this point, where I had to collect the data, and the reason I shut it down was test retest for the strength was too high. Whereas if you compare, again, I'm the very few researchers when it comes to that acute intervention presenting measurement error for all my assessments. The muscle thickness measurement error was very, very low, which is good to detect an effect. But yeah, that's long story short, why we did a study, why we only published the study now. And I'm not going to circle back to some points, but just to provide you with some context. Yeah.
I did when you were talking about the 10 rep max thing, and then they have to think about doing it the next day. At least from my experience, because I participated here in a study at FSU, we did a VO2 max test. And for anyone who hasn't done a VO2 max test, they are the worst. And so doing that one day, I didn't want to do it again the next day, but you sign up for it. And so it's like every time you do it, I would kind of lie to myself and say, this is my best. This is my best. And little did you realize the best was actually the first time, and the rest, I just didn't want to do it anymore. But I forced myself to try. So it's not always 100% perfect.
Yes.
Your point about swelling or differentiating swelling and inflammation, I think that's really important because I don't think they're the same either, right? Swelling or edema, it's like you mentioned, fluid accumulation, but it may or may not cause inflammation. So just because you have swelling doesn't necessarily mean you have this damage going on.
And that's for 48 hours, 72. Yes.
And so I wanted to kind of ask with your study design, because I know it's getting a lot of criticism. Um, you mentioned that you have like your own personal opinions on this like statistical stuff, and a lot of research on these sort of topics don't necessarily have enough power. Um, so you're gonna like it's kind of inevitable that it's going to be limited in that sense. From the arguments that you've heard of your paper, I think the people have reached out to you about it. Do you have any like response to that you want to mention, or was that within participant design that you're saying that when you're studying a participant in that sort of way, just because you have a sample size of 13 doesn't necessarily mean it's small?
Underpowered.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm not following what people. I don't have a time to follow what people are criticizing on social media. It's not. I came across a few things that people sent me, and I think I replied to two people, and like, sorry, that's a waste of my time. It's like.
And sorry, and then they get upset because they're saying that you don't want to have this argument. But I'm going to kind of speak in this sort of way. I think someone in your position who's I don't think people understand how busy a researcher is, and I never understood this until I saw the lab when I participated in it, or when I speak with researchers. They're extremely busy, and so when you kind of say I don't have the time for this, I think maybe someone in your position has had experience speaking to people like this, and you go, it's not going to go anywhere. I have better things to do. I have a family I want to spend time with. It's just not worth it for someone like, let's say me, a student who doesn't really have, who's more freely available, so I could spend more time arguing in the comments, versus somebody who actually has other things to do and projects to attain at a certain level. Is just, not a good use of your time.
Yeah, and again, like, I hope that does not come across as arrogance, because I'm not arrogant whatsoever. People who know me, if you interact with people who know me, I don't think you ever gonna heard or hear, sorry, that, oh, Dr. Souza is super arrogant. I'm not. It's just about my priorities and where I put my time and energy. I'm about to turn 50 years old. Man, time is my priority. I guess, like you said, my family is my priority, and the job I do consumes a lot of time. So it's not worth it, the energy. And like you said, I'm going nowhere, because something really important to everything I'm sharing here with you, I don't benefit from financial standpoint, from personal gain standpoint. I have no conflicts of interest whatsoever about the things I'm going to discuss or the things we have been discussing so far. Is what I'm sharing for you is my view as a scientist. I'm not saying I'm the because we scientists, I think there are a lot of things we agree, a lot of things we disagree, and that's the beauty and what keeps pushing the field forward. Because if everybody agreed on something, we'd stop studying that, right? It's the energy, and like, man, I'm going nowhere here, and that goes back to a consistent pattern or behavior we see is the selective criticism, because the studies they use to support their narrative, they don't mention blinding for assessment. They don't mention measurement error for that assessments. They don't mention, they didn't justify the sample size or did a power calculation. And what we did, and I think the wording was I can always pull up the skills that, yeah, English is my second language, sorry, but I think the post hoc analysis, the post hoc wording was a bad choice, because I was rereading again the Laken's paper, and what I did was more a sensitivity analysis for a transparency sake, to see what our study could actually detect, not to reanalyze the results. So that was the last thing I did, because my personal opinion with studies are underpowered in our field, big time. Okay. But we have a power to detect a given effect. But as I mentioned in the limitation section, sorry, that does not free us from sampling variance. We can't sample the entire population, right? We're gonna pick some people to do studies. And when it comes to trained individuals, does my sample represent the whole spectrum of trained individuals? We can have a people slightly more, way less trained. So again, what we did in that study, the design is strong and it speaks by itself. So far, maybe tomorrow, right? I have been publishing for, I don't know, like I said, almost 20 years. I never ever received a letter to the editor criticizing the methods of my papers. One day may happen, right? One day may happen. So far, I haven't received a letter from scientists, from my peers, criticizing the methods of a study or we employed something wrong. Again, the study design is quite strong. We have a within participant design. Like I said, 13 people in the within participant design gives us more power than 30 people easily, because I'm removing the between people noise and all the biological variability. We are removing, like I said, in that study was Juan being comparing with Juan, not Eduardo being compared to Juan when you have a between group. So we reported all the measurement error for all the assessments we did in that paper. And although we have a power to detect a given effect, right? We did that. Going back to the power analysis, I think that was the second paper I did a similar approach, because in the past, like the journals started to ask people to do power analysis, and a lot of people started to do that, not understanding power analysis. G Power, the software, in my opinion, was like a black box. It's getting better, but for me, it's like let's try to recruit as many as we can, and run the study. And that was the what we tried to detect here, and that was how many people we were able to recruit. Just to share, and people don't realize the how much work goes into research. I talk about, besides us discussing here, the study we finished for the sleeping, we interviewed 102 people. We tested 60 people, and we finished the training intervention with 42 people. It's a lot. The volume study, we did the same approach in the volume study, that we showed no differences between low volume and progressing volume. And then the one side of the camp used the paper to say, you see, you don't need to do too much volume. But that paper was underpowered. We mentioned that. So we did the post hoc, or the sensitivity analysis, to say what effect we could actually detect. And for that paper, my data kind of aligns with James Steele data, showing that for the size of effect we have, we don't need 300 people. Who does that? Nobody does that. 300 people in the study to detect for the interaction, to detect a significant interaction effect. That's important. A lot of people do power analysis using the effect size for the within group change, or detect within group change. I did the sensitivity analysis, or post hoc, and I just submitted the proof yesterday. I kept post hoc. Like, I could change it. Like, I'm gonna keep post hoc, but then I explain, like, what we did here was for transparency, to see what the design could actually detect, not to reanalyze the results. So we didn't do that. And we have enough power to detect that effect we established in the paper. However, and again, as we said in the limitation section, it does not free us from sampling variance. I mean, my sample might not be representative of the entire trained population. So that's why it gets frustrating. And like, I'm not going to waste my time discussing, because people come with a preconception to criticize because the findings go against what they are selling and proposing. I'm not
Yeah, I
selling.
guess get some more views.
Yeah, I'm not about views. Not interesting. I don't have a mission statement for my Instagram. I'm not interested in personal gain. I'm interested in being a good husband and good dad. This is it. That's not. I don't care about being famous or rich, whatever. And I realized a while ago people are criticizing because the findings go against what they're proposing, what they're saying. That's not what I do.
Yeah, and it's not to say that, their opinions don't matter because they're uh, posting on TikTok. I think people bring up some interesting points. I think many of us, including me, I think we're still going through that Dunning-Kruger effect. We don't know it yet. It's happened to me multiple times.
Oh yeah.
So I guess to give you a little more details, because I think you may have answered a little bit of this, because I wanted to ask you more specifically, was like, how did you determine the minimal detectable change and the stability of that and what that means for the measures? But also, what would you expect if you had a bigger sample size?
I think the data would still hold if we have a sample size, because again, the interpretations were based on the estimate and the confidence intervals of those estimates. Okay, so usually, again, in the minimal detectable difference, yes, you can use data to guide us, but there is a lot about your input as a scientist. So usually what we did, okay, that was the output for the mixed model analysis, which is a very robust, is just people have an idea, is way more robust than two-way ANOVA or three-way ANOVA for different reasons. And then you have the individual variation. So we get key parameters like the pretty much based on the measurement error or the correlation of the measurements, and based on the variance, we establish what would be the minimal detectable or what the design could actually detect. And like I said, if the sample size was larger, probably would see very similar response. Like I don't think we would see something different because overall, again, they respond very, very similar. But again, we had people who could, on average, could squat around almost 3 plates for a parallel squat. They were quite strong for leg press. Their average was almost 5 years of training. So pretty much those guys, they were in the lab, like some of those guys were in the lab when you were piloting for the first volume study I did at UT. Then one of my students, he wanted to study like, hey, let's look at this maximal recoverable volume, those kind of things. And like, man, that's just a hypothesis. We don't have a like a physiological rationale for that, right? Like, yeah, but let's then we did a study, we recruit more people, 13 passionate individuals doing that. And again, so based on the statistical analysis, once you run the mixed model, you get the correlation between the measurements, you get the variance of your measurement, and based on as a researcher, what we know about the measurement, you can say, yeah, we can detect this effect with a certain level of confidence. I don't think if the sample size was larger, we would see something different. But again, based on the way they responded.
Yeah, and I mean, where would this leave a good way to kind of as a conclusion for people who read this paper? They're like, oh, well, we can tolerate more, or it's just one paper, so we shouldn't like put all our eggs in the basket. And also, how does this affect us with the repeated bad effect? Because I think many people underestimate how powerful that mechanism could be.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you touch on important things. And something I keep telling even social media, that One study does not carry the weight to change practical application. I think that study just shows us that training people can recover from high volume training sessions. We don't know the cumulative effect, although we have a lot of chronic studies with the cumulative effect. But in that case, being an acute study is even better for what we measure, because based on repeated bout effect, we know the magnitude of swelling of edema was present. That would be smaller down the line if they kept repeating the training for 12 weeks. So I think, again, the study shows that in that condition, right, people can recover from 21 weekly sets. Sorry, 21 sets per training session. And going back to other study we did in our lab, that study was about comparing different techniques like superset, force reps, pre-exhaustion, and something we did different in that study was a lot of those acute studies looking at swelling, muscle activation. They just do one bout and this is it. What if we repeat the bout? And again, my expectation was we're gonna do one session that was 10 sets to failure for pec, 5 sets to failure flat bench, 5 sets to failure incline bench. The guys could bench like easily 1.2 times their body weight. Just have an idea, that puts you, depends on the normative data you're going to look at. If you bench 1.2 times your body weight, that puts you top 30% strongest within a population of males between 20 29 years old. So we got people pretty strong. When they repeated the session 48 hours later, what we found, volume load almost increased on day 2. Muscle activation, no difference from day 2. Swelling at the baseline was exactly the same compared to day 1 as well. So again, doing 10 sets to failure and repeating that at just 48 hours later, we reported again that the volume load, the equation sets times load, sets times reps times load, did not decrease. Muscle activation did not increase, and not increase in muscle swelling as well. So again, I have been studying those guys for a while, and I think the advantage about being acute study, because those acute responses are amplified compared to long-term responses. And if it was just the volume, I think it was with you, I shared the paper between, I think it was you, I shared, quite far wrong, I shared the paper by, what is the name? I think I wrote down the Farrell paper. They have a BFR versus was low training 40% with a BFR and 40% with traditional training. And they have a way more swelling. The swelling was way higher at the first training session for BFR. Who did the more volume? I just wrote down here. So the total reps per session was 220 reps for traditional versus 85. So talk about easily 2 times and a half more volume for traditional compared to BFR. Untrained people. The time under tension for that was just curved, was 16 minutes versus 7 minutes. Again, you talk about more than twice the time under tension. But was not the higher volume condition that demonstrated the high swelling, was a BFR. The swelling was way higher. But then when they repeated the same bout, and that was elevated for 48 hours, then when they repeated the same bout at post-training intervention, 3 hours later, no difference. So first, 2 important things. No difference between one condition with more swelling compared to the other one, and everything returned to the baseline 3 hours later. So again, I think having acute, like you said, having acute is better in that sense because we are looking at amplified response. Because even if that is exercise-inducing damage intervention, we know the magnitude of response is going to be smaller after 10, 12 weeks because the repeated bout effect.
And I did want to mention, a lot of people think that, yeah, trained lifters have more or experience more damage because they learn to recruit more of their motor units. You know, they have more, they have a greater probability of greater damage because of factors like that. But I mean, you mentioned activity is the same, but also I think if you do something for a very long time, that's probably why bodybuilders can tolerate such high volumes too.
We
I
do,
guess
yeah,
other than steroids.
we do have steroids in the equation, but even natural bodybuilders, they do train with some train with a high volume, others they train with a lower volume. But we do have a data that even paper from Professor Nozaka showing that magnitude of damage is smaller in trained compared to untrained. Although if they're lifting more absolute loads, that muscle is more protected. So that's what repeated bout is about, right? It's a protective mechanism against new damage, considering the first one was really painful.
Yeah, and I think Nosaka also brings up that this whole calcium ion damage thing. He goes in a recent opinion he just posted. He talked about how most of the damage is likely at the connective tissue level rather than at the fiber level, because when we look at these papers of calcium ion damage, and Ormsby also, I don't think he looked at that, but he was looking at muscle damage. They take these animal models and they make them do an insane amount of contractions to like the muscle's dead. And then we're applying that. If we were to apply that into a resistance training session, we would lose. We would get necrosis. I mean,
Yeah.
Ormsby tried that one time where they tried a paper. He was telling me about this, and they had participants do 250 eccentric contractions, but they never managed to do the paper because the participants started getting Rambo.
Yeah.
Ramdo, and so it's nobody does those contractions on a resistance training session.
No, that's those. But again, right? It goes back. That's why I don't waste my energy on certain discussions, because when they're using a mechanistic study that's too small, that was conducting animals, there is no mention of measurement error whatsoever. That's fine as long as it serves to support certain narratives. And then that type of and then they dismiss, right, that type of methodological flaws to convey a point, but then start to picking on something that we scientists don't even consider as a limitation. So yeah, I think we can't. I think that's important thing to keep in mind, that we can't generalize findings beyond the study intervention, duration, population. We can't talk about in vitro versus in vivo. Like you said, right? We, for example, I learned when I started to study about muscle damage, I learned from a pioneer in our field that I think so many people even don't even heard about her, Priscilla Clarkson. She was if I'm not mistaken, I think Nozaka did an internship with her. She was amazing female scientist. She was a pioneer in that field. And back then, we were talking a lot about, again, ultra-structural damage, right? But I think something we change it big time, or as we have a more and more evidence that damage is primarily biochemical. There is some ultra-structure disruption that in more in the sense that you are deassembling and rebuilding afterwards the fibers. You're not tearing the fibers apart, you're not ripping the fibers, but there is certain deassembling and rebuilding after that, let's say, biochemical storm that takes place. That, right, the tension, especially like in T-tube or sarcoplasmic reticulum, we may have that leakage of calcium as well. But like you said, we can't extrapolate certain conditions like this to people lifting weights in the gym in completely different scenarios, intensity. But again, a lot of people do that with a very confidence, right? But the goal is different. It's not about pushing forward the field and expanding the knowledge. Like you said, there are so many things we still don't know.
Well, I mean, I agree about like I'm a big believer that calcium is important in damage. I haven't seen one paper that directly looks at a resistance training session and then tries to measure the calcium accumulation and how that relates to damage. I've only mainly seen it from animal or mouse models, mice models. Um,
And again,
and I mean,
I think that's important, and I totally agree for you. And also in the timeline, right? Is the cause or the consequence of something? We can't pinpoint that at this point as well. Like, is calcium is the cause or the consequence?
yeah, and
It,
uh,
it,
I mean, it could be both.
yeah.
I just
So I'm saying I don't know, but I know a lot of people believe they know. I don't. Just saying, I don't know.
Yeah, and then you have more research coming out with reactive ROSs contributing to damage with calcium.
Yes.
So again, I believe calcium is a cause for damage. I would like to see a paper that specifically looks at high reps causing more calcium accumulation. And we could use, mechanistic rationale, but at the end of the day, I would still like to see a paper to measure that. And I spoke with one of the researchers who does calcium damage, and she goes, we don't have the technology for that right now. It's not as easy as people could be like, oh, just do a study on this.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
that's a
but
different
I
topic.
I did want to touch on atrophy a little bit because I know you have another paper showing that you did, what was it, 3 weeks of or just one time resistance training
Oh, okay,
a
okay.
week or something, and you showed no atrophy within that week. So
Let,
before we jump into, from my
go ahead.
understanding, we have muscle protein synthesis and then muscle protein breakdown, and then atrophy. When we have hypertrophy or protein synthesis, the protein synthesis is larger than that muscle protein breakdown, and then if we have atrophy, the muscle protein breakdown is higher, but it has to be higher for a period of time. And so what people believe is that yes, protein turnover is constantly occurring. However, from what I get is that we have a level of equilibrium. So yes, we're increasing, decreasing, but there is this level it maintains where we don't have, just because we have greater protein breakdown doesn't mean we're atrophying. And then once we go up, we're building muscle. There's a level of equilibrium.
All
And
right.
so I think in a healthy individual who trains 2, maybe even 1 time a week, we're not going to have that within atrophy design. And this doesn't just happen at the whole muscle level. I think this happens in the fiber level because they go, oh, this only happens at the whole muscle level where we don't see atrophy. No, it's within the fiber that we see this turnover occur. So I don't.
Yeah, no, that's interesting discussion. Yeah, that study we published, I don't know, 2017 or 2018. We keep talking. I keep writing down things. So, okay, just clarified. Protein turnover is the processes in which proteins are being built and degraded 24/7, right? To observe muscle mass accrual or the addition of contractile proteins, like you said, synthesis must outweigh breakdown. The two agents or factors that elevate protein synthesis, a high protein meal and resistance training, but the effect of resistance training is way larger compared to a protein meal. But we know that throughout the day, right, we have that fluctuation about which is called the protein turnover. And again, as long at the end of the day, right, the difference between synthesis and breakdown is positive, you are adding contractile proteins pretty much. If and how does that happen, right? How we increase protein synthesis is resistance training and protein. Although I think protein intake above 1.5, 1.6 is overrated, big time. It's fine if you want to give a shot for 2 grams or 2.5 per kg of body weight. But again, that's the process, right? And when you did a study, the study was pretty much was 8 weeks of training. We had kind of a regular resistance training. The first 4 weeks, twice a week training. The second half of the study was 3 times per week training. We didn't observe any difference using gold standard for measuring hypertrophy, MRI. No differences between 2 and 3 times, which data doesn't support that narrative big time that twice is better than 3 and vice versa, or 3 better than 2. So then after that 8 weeks, we had the one group that interrupted their training regimen. They stopped it. And then we measured them for another 8 weeks. We had the other two groups that dropped their volume by almost 60%, but one group was training once a week and the other group was training twice a week. What we found was that compared to the first training intervention, they were training 2 or 3 times per week. There were no differences when they dropped the volume. So it kind of, they got in maintenance, so to speak, because we have, think about that. We have a 3 times point, 0, 8, 16 weeks. So what we found that for the 16 weeks compared to 8, there was no difference. They didn't grow more, but they still, that the 16 weeks point was still higher than the baseline. Whereas the group that interrupted the training, they went back to, so 16 weeks was smaller than 8 weeks, and 16 weeks was not different than 0. So they went back, they lost everything they gained. But we don't talk about trophy, they gained muscle, and then they went back to the baseline levels. So the study again showed that training once or twice a week with way less volume did not cause a trophy. And again, like, how many studies in training people we have at this point that people only were training twice a week and they grew muscle. So between 20 and 30 years old, we must say though, most of data about sarcopenia, the natural muscle waste associated with aging, that data come from pretty much from people who have not been exercising. So we know that after 30, 40, right, 30, kind of your peak, based on that data, which that population, and after 40, you start losing muscle. We do have a data that depend, even like if you do cardio, like if you're a triathlete, if you're a swimmer, although those exercise modalities are not the best to build muscle, you still maintaining more muscle compared to your counterparts sedentary. But again, I'm not aware. There are so many studies in our field that healthy, untrained individuals trained for twice a week, and between pre and post, they observed increase in muscle size, not atrophy. So there is no atrophy bogeyman for people training twice a week. That's I know it's a fairy tale or just like a whatever this narrative came from. That doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, what about even just training 1 time a week, or let's say taking a week off? Would you be worried about atrophying occurring, at least at the fiber level even?
I think, and again, like, if you do that differentiation between fiber and again, I measure muscle hypertrophy for fiber, ultrasound, MRI. Fiber hypertrophy changes way more than ultrasound or MRI. Cross-sectional area changes more compared to thickness, so on and so forth. But we must acknowledge that. And again, I'm gonna invite the listeners, go to fiber hypertrophy studies. Show me one study that has reported measurement error for muscle fiber hypertrophy. We don't. So that's something we must account for that. Data from Roberts, Dr. Mike Roberts, showing that changes in fiber hypertrophy are not representative of change in whole muscle size. So those are things we must acknowledge when you are discussing this topic. So I think, of course, I would love to see if, even without training, we don't lose muscle between 20 and 30 years old. Uh, I think it depends a lot on your training status. That's another thing we need to advance, how training status plays a role in muscular adaptations. We need to advance more on there for sure. But I would say that for a lot of people, training once a week, if you never train, that might even make you gain some muscle. If you're highly trained, training once a week, maybe that puts you in maintenance category. But I don't see people between 20, 30 years old. And again, even 30, 40, if you're training once, I don't see you experience hypertrophy. Atrophy.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, age. I mean, if you're like 80 years old, maybe you're atrophying a lot quicker, so that could play a role. But they like to use a lot of immobilization studies to show that atrophy happens within a week.
Yeah, again, we can't strip up. So, what is the best way to study atrophy? Is immobilization, limb suspension, remove gravity and movement. This is it. And watch the muscle. Can you extrapolate that for people walking around and young people? Yes, you can have atrophy if I had a motorcycle crash a while ago. My left leg is still way smaller. I was 30 something years old. I had 9 fractures in my left foot. Yes, I experienced atrophy because that was a scenario. Immobilization and put my limb high, right? So that's how we study atrophy, the best way. Immobilization, put a cast, whatever, limb suspension. This is it. It goes back to the beginning of conversation, not the beginning, 10 minutes ago, we were talking about extrapolating data from animal 250 century contractions to people going to the gym. We can't make, that's a leaping logic, in my opinion. We can't go there. As a scientist, it is a big jump that I don't dare to do it.
And I don't think people realize how big that jump is. I mean, especially the ones who would do the whole motor control thing and then extrapolating that quickly to training status and muscle leverages, because you're making assumptions from biomechanics, motor control, physiology, and
Yeah.
etc. It's a
And that's
big gap.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people, they hate evidence-based practice, because you don't do that if you are training evidence-based practice, right? The type of again, go to PCOT: population, intervention, comparison, outcome, and time. That's where you got to lean your thoughts. You can't generalize beyond that. Yes, we do, right, with a certain degree of caution. Yes, you can do acknowledging the uncertainty, knowledge, but like you said, that jump is too big to make, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we kind of tackled on the swelling paper, the atrophy, your opinions on the statistical methodology, and again, there might be disagreement there, but at the same time, you know, one paper is one paper, and your views and your experience in the lab is probably completely different from somebody who hasn't even stepped foot in the lab and hasn't measured these things at all. So, you know, there might be some knowledge there that people just won't be able to realize until they step foot in the mud or in the door.
Yeah.
But is there any way you want to kind of wrap this podcast up with a conclusion on the swelling recommendations, or people should worry about it or not sweat about it, and atrophy in general?
Yeah, regarding to the swelling, and I think it's not just my opinion. Several researchers I respect, they share the same opinion than mine, that trained people uh, undergoing resistance training studies, swelling is not a confounding factor inflating the measurement of hypertrophy 48 hours post last training session. Even when you look again, I think looking at the acute responses, because we have an amplified response between conditions, we see, depending on the several studies we see that the things go back to baseline 24 hours later. Yes, we have one study showing that was an increased response all the way to 72 hours. My opinion, that's more a false positive because 48 hours was not different from baseline, but 72 hours was different. And when you look at the confidence interval of the estimates, they overlap big times. Like you can't say that 24 hours, 48, 72 hours are different, but people are going to pick just that study. With for me, is a false positive because of things I said. I don't have a blinding mention for the assessment. I don't have a measurement arrow, but when it's convenient, people are going to pick that data to convey narrative, whatever. We also have people saying that, oh, now as they can't continue with the damage edema story, and it keeps going back and forth. Now is the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, and they use the Cottingham study to say that. Again, we can't. That study doesn't allow us to make any inference about causality because it was a single group study with only the high responders for hypertrophy were analyzed, and then they found that the group that progressed from 10 to 30 weekly sets within 6 weeks, they have an increase in sarcoplasmic proteins. Again, that's such weak evidence to say, no, edema now is sarcoplasmic. And again, other researchers like me keep saying that if sarcoplasmic hypertrophy exists, it responds for very small portion of the muscle growth because muscle is 80-85% contractile myofibrillar proteins. Okay, so again, I think we are way past. It was never a concern in the scientific community measuring muscle size 48 hours or 72 hours post, because what we learned from those measurements, we are the ones doing those measurements and learning from them. I think again, it's if you want to criticize the high volume, pick the right thing to criticize. That maybe the changes are not meaningful after searching volume. Maybe what Pallant chose for minimal detectable difference is too optimistic. Pick the right things to criticize. No, don't just replicate stuff that people keep saying and try to learn by yourself. Reach out to scientists. Again, when I'm approached and people ask me something, I take my time to reply and try to understand. I also realize that some people reach out just to convey their point and tell me I'm wrong. And I don't have any problem to be wrong. But again, we don't have a very unlikely, right? We can't speak in absolutes, but not just me, several other researchers in my field, we think that it's very unlikely that swelling, aka edema, will be a confounding factor for training people undergoing hypertrophy studies. Like I said, I think the more is better also is problematic because we have another thing that people need to account easily and not making up the number. More than 90% of a hypertrophy literature lean on three muscles or three muscle groups: quads, elbow flexors, and elbow extensors. This is it. Muscle is muscle. But more than 90% of the literature lean on those three muscles. I can't say optimal volume, whatever, for back, for other muscles, because 90% of the literature come from those three muscles. We have been studying volume in the very specific conditions, traditional resistance training twice per week. We did a myoreps study now. It's about, I know when it's going to be published because we sent the proof a while ago, but the volume load again, sets times reps times load, was way lower in myoreps, and they demonstrated the same muscle. So again, when you do like training methods or training techniques, do you need to do you need this more volume? We can't answer that because you are only studying volume manipulation under traditional training regimens. Another important thing, and again, if you want to criticize volume, I think those are legit concerns, and that's why we can't make. For me, it's quite as big to say more is better or ultimately more volume leads to more muscle growth. Because again, even if I'm gonna agree with a parent and colleagues and say that 2% is the minimal detectable difference, although most of studies included, they have a measurement error above that. And error is not just random, we have a systematic error as well. So after 30 weekly sets, there is no minimal differences. The parent meta-analysis demonstrated that after in those conditions, after 30, if you are assuming that 2% is meaningful difference, after 30, there is no meaningful difference. And you don't have as many studies above 30. And we also have been studying training volume when you are only doing one muscle group in your training regimen. Can you do 30 weeks per set for all your muscle groups? No, you can't. Would the response be the same? What about adherence if now you're doing 20 weekly sets for all the muscle groups you are working out? So again, we are doing that specialization phase training volume for one specific muscle groups. So even for training volume, and again, at this point I have a published six studies about this topic. I have a 3 or 4 more in the pipeline. I'm still learning from this dose response relationship, but bottom line is like be humble. It's good to be skeptical, but be open to learn rather than just be told or be replicating things that look nice on the social media post or whatever. It is like be open-minded, be humble. Good science is humble and always acknowledge uncertainty. I think that's pretty much why I hope people totally fine disagree and think something disagree for me and the studies, but at least I'm expect like a critiques they are valid, not just replication from what some people on social media with a lot of hidden conflict of interests are saying, right? So that's the point. I gotta disclose my conflict of interests every time I'm publishing a paper. Uh, Content creators, they don't need to bother about that.
And I did want to ask, I mean, for any future research, do you guys plan maybe to look at more mechanistically what could be going on? Maybe one day you could look at if whether, you do have a good amount of calcium accumulation or something like that. Because again, with all these damage stuff, because a lot of it is people say it's due to damage. Um, we don't do 100 titanic contractions in the gym or something like that, or we don't really see that much calcium being accumulated as we see in these animal models. We're doing it in a resistance training setting, which could be different. Maybe we don't see as much calcium accumulation. We do see damage, but not as much damage. So I don't know if any in the future you're thinking about looking at more like mechanistic stuff to see what could be going on, because there is a lot of outcome data, but not a lot of mechanistic data that I think could be beneficial.
Yeah, we are. I need to reach out to Dr. Clayton Libard. He does a lot of research in resistance training as well. He was the mentor for Scarpelli, the study about volume increasing 20%. So your friends, I know you're doing something. I need to reach out where he at from a mechanistic standpoint with a very aggressive, way more than 52 weekly sets to see what happens. But not as far as concerned, not looking at calcium. I think I don't know. People have this idea that mechanistic data is better than outcome. They're different. They help us to understand different things. Very often, mechanistic data or studies are underpowered. They have a very tiny samples. You can't find. Pull up, read a Western blotting paper. Show me test, retest, reliability, measurement error data for Western blotting. Do we call anyone? No, we don't have it. So it's again. I want to be skeptical for my field and with everything I do to be a better scientist. And I know, again, we are looking at something from a mechanistic standpoint from very high volumes and see if there is a point that we have a detrimental effect. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not recall if we're looking at calcium. I don't think so. And again, mechanistic studies, I don't have the settings here. I done that, so I did that, and I was talking to Daniel Plotkin and joking like, man, he was sharing image from wet lab. I don't miss that at all. Like biopsies, Western blotting, gene expression, muscle fiber analysis. Yes, I did that. I learned a lot. It helped me to be the scientist I am. But in my lab, I don't have the structure to do that, unless I can partner with the biology. But again, I can't study everything in our field. So I know Mike Roberts, Stu Phillips. There's so many other people, Hanningberg Lab. So there are so many other great scientists. I forgot the people from Finland. I'm not gonna cite. So they do a lot of mechanistic cool data. I'm gonna keep doing my outcome studies so people have a content to work and share on social media, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. De Souza, for your time. I'm sure this was able to clear the background of the paper, your opinions on some things, bring light to some other topics that people probably weren't thinking about because you're too caught up with their own ideas. If people want to find you or reach out to you, where can they go ahead and do that?
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on again. It's always nice when I have opportunity to discuss our research, our findings. I really like those interactions. And yeah, I'm being somewhat active on Instagram lately, which is my handle, I think, is drdesouza.eo. Yeah, once in a while I share some thoughts about science, the publications. You can find my publications on ResearchGate or Google Scholar. You can find my institutional email on University of Tampa website, and yeah, feel free to reach out. Thank you again.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll make sure to, if it's okay with you, I'll add some of those things in the captions below for people who do want to reach out with any questions or follow-ups. And I'll link the paper of the swelling, the recent one, also down in the caption. But
totally fine.
Well, again, thank you, Dr. De Souza, and thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys on the next episode.